I would like to thank our partners that extended their support to this event. Associate partners MENA Clean Energy Business Council, CETA EV Charger, who is also the panel sponsor on day one. Supporting associations: the European Association for Electromobility, Electric Drive Transportation Association, Electric Vehicle Association of Thailand. And the supporting partners: Qatar Solar Energy, Fin Value, Electroheads, the Brattle Group, Rare Group, A Great E Incorporated, and our media partner, Circuit Digest.
I'm going to talk to you briefly this morning, your evening and my morning, about innovative rate design and smart charging of electric vehicles, or EVs for short. As most of you know, EV sales have been rising over time in just about every continent on the globe. In particular, what I'm going to share with you in much of this presentation is the experience we have had with EVs in the United States. And I will comment on rate design issues again from the standpoint of the United States, but keep in mind that these ideas are perfectly global and generalizable to the Middle East and to just about every continent on the planet. EV sales in the United States are shown here as a bar chart, both incrementally and in a cumulative fashion. Let's just look at the cumulative sales. Those are shown for the US as a whole by the dark orange line, and the sales in California are shown with the green line. So you can see that sales have been rising since the fourth quarter of 2010, and they are picking up momentum now. But what is also apparent is California accounts for almost half of the US sales. In California, the distribution of EVs varies by model and geography. The urban areas, which include the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, and San Diego, dominate the presence of EVs. And if you look at the bar charts, you will see that Tesla dominates the models within California, and that is actually also true within the United States. So by and large, in the US today, the story of EVs is the story of one state and one brand, which is Tesla. It is obviously going to change with time because more states are getting into EVs, they are passing climate change legislation, and more manufacturers are entering the market. Just about all of the major manufacturers, like General Motors, like Ford, and the European automakers like BMW and Mercedes and Porsche, they're all planning to introduce EV models. Some have already done that. And in 10 years, I suspect the picture will look quite different. As we look out 10 years into the future for the US as a whole, the sales of EVs, which currently are around 3% in the year 2021, are expected to rise by a factor of 10 and approach 30% just 10 years out. Now, that is one of many forecasts. It really depends on who you talk to. Right now, it's a guessing game, but just about anyone guessing is saying that the future will belong to EVs. The days of the internal combustion engine are pretty much coming to a close. So let's now talk about EV charging. Our studies indicate that about 75 to 80% of the charging takes place at home. EVs can really add a lot of consumption to the typical customer. Like the typical customer in California uses about 600 kilowatt hours a month. So you could see that consumption rising by 1/4 to 1/2 if they decide to charge their EVs at home. The question is, what kind of level charging are they going to use? Level 1 charging in the US means 110 volts, which is the standard power supply in the US. It will draw 1.5 kW of power and take forever. For example, I have a Model 3 Tesla. I have plugged it in this picture, that's on the left side, and the rate of charging is telling me it'll take more than 24 hours to charge. Level 2 charging draws roughly 7 kW of power and takes much less time. So for a similar amount of charge, the 24 hours in the above picture will become 6 hours in the lower picture. So that's an order of magnitude improvement, but it is still a lot of power being drawn from the grid. And so the challenge for electric utilities, whether in the US or in Europe or the Middle East, or actually Africa or Latin America or Australia, the challenge is how to avoid creating a new peak load. Everybody wants, as a utility, to have more to sell, to have their prayers answered. The EVs have arrived. It is the cutting edge of electrification in most climate change policies. But it could also be you might wish that my prayer had not been answered as a utility because of the peak load situation. So what you want to do is you want people to charge during the off-peak hours. So the best way to do that is to provide a price signal to the customers telling them to please charge in the off-peak period because you're going to save money. So in this example, at a high level, if there's a flat rate, the charging number is $744. That's per year. And you can compare that, by the way, to a gasoline car for which it'll be $1460. So the EVs in this example will cost half as much to charge on a flat rate. But if you go to a time of use rate with a 3-to-1 ratio, in other words, the off-peak price is a third of the peak period price, then the charging cost will drop to $510, which is about a third of the gasoline car. And if the ratio is the off-peak price is a tenth of the peak period price, then the number will become, let's say, around 300. So it'll drop down to 20% of what otherwise would be the case. And so there is a huge opportunity, a win-win opportunity for the utility, because now it's not adding to peak load, and also for the EV driver, because they are now paying a lot less than they would on a flat rate. Rate design is probably going to influence the charging pattern, but it will probably not influence the adoption rate of EVs. And we can come back to this issue later on. I'm focusing right now on just the charging aspect, but sometimes people ask me, will rate design also encourage more people to buy an EV? So far, we have no evidence of that, because most people who don't have an EV don't understand rate design. They typically are buying an EV because it's a nice car, it's a fancy car, it drives fast, and it is clean. The price of power is not yet playing a huge role, but of course it will eventually. So what we did was we surveyed utilities in the US to identify how many innovative rates were they offering to their EV drivers. And by the way, most EV drivers also own their cars, but many of them lease the cars. So I'm using the term EV driver rather than EV owner to make that very clear, that we are talking about anyone who is driving an EE, whether they own it or lease it is a secondary issue. So what I will do is I will give you some specific case studies. This is just the statistics on the survey. So what we did was we looked at the answers to the survey, and we found that most utilities' EV-specific rates, which are time of use rates, are more advantageous than comparable non-EV offerings, which is the flat rates. Many utilities have conducted pilots to see whether or not customers will take advantage of those lower rates during the off-peak periods. And the answer is yes, they will take advantage of it. So at a high level, these 27 rates differ in the number of seasons. Some have 2 seasons, some have just 1 year round, in other words, no season. The number of pricing periods. The most common is 3 pricing periods, because if you have 3 pricing periods, you're going to get a bigger discount in the off-peak period. These are the price ratios, and the price ratio here is being measured as the ratio of the peak price to the off-peak price. The higher the ratio, the bigger the discount in the off-peak period. So if you look at the bar chart on the left and look at the 3 or more periods, the median ratio is 3.74 to 1. And for the 2-period rate, it is roughly 3 to 1. And rates differ between the summer and the winter. In the US, most utilities are summer peaking, and that's why there's more of a focus on avoiding the summer peaks. Obviously, that'll be even more true in the Middle East, where the summers are really intense and hot. The TOU rates also vary across the utilities in the duration of the peak period. The typical peak period, as shown on the bar chart on the upper left in the summer, is 5 hours, but some of them have much longer peak periods. The off-peak periods are shown right below in blue, and so the off-peak periods are longer than the peak periods. The rate I have as an EV driver has an off-peak period that begins at midnight and it goes until 3 in the afternoon, so it's very long. So during normal working hours before the pandemic, I was charging my car. I would plug it in at 8 or 9 p.m. whenever I wanted to, but the timer in the car was set to begin charging at midnight, which is when the off-peak period began. And typically I would leave for work at 7 in the morning, and so the charging would stop at 6:30 a.m. And it was very convenient having that long off-peak period. I am on a 3-period rate, which is the most common rate being offered in the US. And here are some rates for you to just quickly look at. Happy to answer questions later on. The rate I'm on is the one shown on the upper left. It has 3 periods. The off-peak is really low at 17 cents, which of course is expensive, but this is California's numbers. The peak period is 48 cents. So strong incentive to not charge during the peak or even the mid-peak, which is 37 cents. And the mid-peak period begins at 9 p.m. The peak period for me begins at 4 p.m. and goes till 9 p.m. So on a normal working day, I would come home around 7 p.m. And if I did not have that rate structure, I would just plug it in right there at 7 p.m. But that would cause the peak load problem to arise for the utilities. You can see there are some other rates shown here. The upper 2 rates are both being offered by PG&E. There's a choice. If you want a rate just for your electric car, the rate you then have is the rate shown in the middle of the top row. The peak period price is even higher at 56, but the off-peak drops to 14. And then you have a rate on the upper right side that is shown for Xcel Energy, which is in Minnesota, lower cost state, and therefore the rates are lower. You can see the off-peak rate is 2.8 cents. In Georgia, on the left, lower left corner, the off-peak rate, the super off-peak rate is really, really low at 1 penny. And then you have a rate from Baltimore Gas and Electric in the last bar chart. Now, you might wonder if the rate in Georgia is really so low at 1 penny, why is Georgia not just flooded with EVs? And why is California flooded with EVs, even though the rates are so much higher? Because as I said, rates are just a piece of the reason, a small portion of the reason why people buy an EV. There's another example here from California, which is the utility called SMUD, and they are pushing hard on EVs. They're also providing a rebate of $1,500 at select dealers to encourage people to buy EVs. They are concerned about the peak load problem because, as you see at the bottom, an air conditioner running at full blast, and I realize there are lots of air conditioners in the Middle East as well, but that load is only 5 kW for a typical house in Sacramento, where SMUD is located. The EV will pull a load of 7 kW, so you really don't want people charging EVs during the daytime hours. Here's an example of another utility, which is Austin Energy in Texas. They're offering a subscription plan. So it doesn't matter to you what the rate design is, as long as you charge during the off-peak period. All you will pay is $30 a month for charging a car whose demand is less than 10 kW, which is most EVs. That's very economic. And again, Austin doesn't have a lot of EVs, but they're trying to encourage them through these kinds of offers. Now, what about public charging? Public charging means, for example, if you have a Tesla, you take it to a supercharger. For many years, Tesla did not have a time of use rate at the superchargers, but now they do. And so this is the typical rate they offer in one of my neighboring stores, which is called a Target store. If you charge your car from midnight till 10 in the morning, you pay 21 cents per kilowatt hour. Otherwise, you pay 42 cents until 7 p.m. And then after 7 p.m., you go back to the low off-peak rate. So a huge ratio, right? It costs half as much to charge during the off-peak period. So that was a sort of a broad overview of how utilities in the US are using time of use rates to incentivize avoiding creating a peak. However, we have a lot of things to take into consideration as we design those rates. EV drivers have significantly different needs, load shapes, and flexibility than other residential customers. Therefore, you have to offer them different rates than you offer your regular customers, so to speak. Time of use rates encourage optimal charging patterns, creating a win-win for utilities and customers that drive EVs. Empirical research suggests that EV charging load is highly responsive to rate design. In other words, to a time of use rate with a lower off-peak rate. But there is a catch, and let me mention the catch. Some people don't want their whole house to be on a time of use rate, because then they have to think about when to cook, when to do their laundry, when to watch television, eat dinner, and all of those things that a normal life involves. So some of those customers have an EV, and they usually ask the utility, can I just have the time of use rate for my electric car, not for the whole house? And sure, many utilities offer that, including Pacific Gas and Electric Company, which is the utility in Northern California, which is also my utility. They offer that, and I showed you a bar chart for their time of use rate, where the off-peak price drops down to 14 cents rather than 17 for the whole house rate. The catch is you need to pay for the special meter, because they will then put a special meter just for the electric car. So that's one approach. Another approach, which is right now under experimentation, is to use your level 2 or smart charger as a meter for the electric car. Most of those chargers have Wi-Fi capability, and most utility networks now are able to communicate with devices inside customers' homes that have Wi-Fi capability. So that is an experimental approach being looked at. I believe a pilot in New York City is testing it, and the results are quite encouraging. So it's still down the road, but it's something to keep in mind. Let me also mention a couple of other interesting twists and turns. As you saw in my forecast, EVs will possibly account for 30% of new car sales in 10 years' time in the US. Who knows, maybe in China, they'll account for 50%. China is moving very fast on EVs. And then, of course, you're in a better position to assess what about the opportunities in the Middle East and Asia more broadly. But once you have a lot of EVs out there, they have big batteries. My car's battery is about 70 kilowatt hours of charge. So when I have a power outage, and I've had about half a dozen in the last couple of years, sometimes I wish I could just take the power from my EV battery and keep the lights on in my house. But Tesla doesn't allow it right now. Other manufacturers are allowing it, but you still have to make your charging station, the level 2 charger, the more sophisticated one that allows the two-way transmission of power. And in addition, the electric utility has to allow that to happen as well. So there are some technology and regulatory challenges, but at some point, I believe that'll happen. It's called vehicle to home charging. So instead of the house charging your car will charge your house when you have an outage. The Ford Motor Company has a pickup truck called F-150 that I suspect some of you have seen. I remember seeing a lot of those in Saudi Arabia when I was doing consulting work there. The very big pickup trucks. And the newest version of the F-150 actually has the capability to do vehicle to grid charging. The other sorry, vehicle to home charging. There was a Freudian slip on my part. So the second opportunity, more of a frontier cutting edge, is vehicle to grid. So this is a concept that some utilities are really excited about, and some researchers as well. The California Energy Commission is one of those state agencies that's really pushing hard on that frontier. And what that would do is allow your EV to provide power to the grid when there's a shortage on the grid. In order to do that, you'd have to keep your car plugged in at the time of the emergency, as opposed to driving your car or parking it at an airport where there's no plug-in. So this is a utopian view today, but it could be a real view 15 years from now, maybe even 10, where every car that's an EV, when it's not being driven, will be plugged into some charger, either at home or at work or at a parking lot. That charger would have two-way capability, and the grid would be able, during an emergency, to tap into all those batteries and all the EVs that will be parked as everywhere that the eye can reach. So this is called vehicle to grid charging. Again, those two are down the road concepts, but I thought I'd mention them since they are things that from a research standpoint, you might have an interest in. Of course, an important prerequisite for offering modern rate designs is smart meters or advanced metering infrastructure. In the United States, we now have 100 million smart meters. Out of 138 houses, 100 million of them have smart meters. So that's no longer a challenge. You can offer these rates if you have smart meters. In other countries, it's happening more slowly. Even in Europe, they're not quite as widespread as in the US. However, change is taking place, and I'm sure in the Middle East, smart meters are coming too. If you don't have a smart meter and you want a time of use rate for a house in the Middle East, then you have to put a special meter to accommodate the time of use rate. It's called an interval meter. That can be done too. That's like an intermediate step. And finally, I will comment that public chargers should also begin to offer innovative rate designs like the Tesla superchargers. But there is one problem with the Tesla superchargers. They do not show the price on the charging station. You have to look it up on the screen inside your car or on your phone, and most people will not look at that. I have seen people charging their Teslas during the expensive hours, probably not knowing that they're paying twice as much as they would pay if they had just shifted things around and charged it before 10 in the morning or 7 in the evening. And it shouldn't be difficult to display these prices. After all, even the old-fashioned gas stations display those prices. So why don't I conclude with that thought and take any questions that you might have. Thank you.